Thank you. Good morning again, sisters. I wanted to share with you this Sisterhood of Grace. It was part of the training toolkit received when some of us were asked to have conversations with United Methodist women throughout the conference regarding the sensitive discussions for a way forward. And we thought it would be fitting for us to use today. I will read it aloud and ask that you read along and commit to the covenant during our conversation this morning. As a sisterhood of grace, we will listen in love and with respect. We will hear each other. We will hear each voice with compassion. We will be patient, respectful, and kind with one another. We will respect each person's experience, skill, and talent, knowing that every person has a gift to offer. Speak from your own perspective and experience. Questions are needed and expected and will be addressed as able. Speak into the space with gentleness, respect, confidentiality. Speaking out is courageous, but also remember that silence is appropriate at times. Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica. So just a quick message from myself and Precious as we moderate this session this morning. We really do want it to be a conversation as best we can virtually. So I have muted everyone this morning, and the only people who need to be unmuted going forward are Reverend Tillman and Joe Sheets as they began. But please use the chat. In the chat feature, you can leave questions or comments as the conversation is ongoing. And as Reverend Tillman and Joe throw to us that to see if there are any questions or comments, we'll do that. There's also the raise your hand feature. If you aren't familiar, in the controls where you see the chat, there are more options and reactions where you can raise your hand or lower your hand. You can do applause or show that you're listening or want to give feedback on what's being said. We want to make it as fluid as possible, so we're going to sort of hold the questions that we do have unless we see a raised hand. Following the conversation, there will be a fellowship time. So after the closing and the benediction, if you are able to stay on the line and want to converse and fellowship more, we'll be here to do that. Okay, so let me exit here. What I'd like to do now is sort of present our presenters, our facilitators. I'll go into an extended introduction, but in their own voices and in their own words, we'll let them tell you how they came to be facilitating and coordinating this conversation this morning. So I will bow out, and Reverend Tillman and Joe Sheets, you have the floor.
Brian?
Hello and good morning, everyone. Joe, would you like to go first?
Oh, okay, thank you. Good morning, I'm back on. I was thinking I was going to have to do this by phone, but technology adds another hurdle. I am a deaconess with the United Methodist Church, and my ministry has included working at Action Ministries and working at Community Assistance Center, and then I was sent down to South Louisiana. So working with people that are struggling with economic disparities. I now have worked with the homeless in Atlanta, downtown Atlanta, as well as the rural poor in Louisiana. I must say that I was invited to be part of this discussion on June 11th, and a lot has happened since June 11th. So I am very excited to be here and have these conversations, and I have a new friend in Brian. We met off, and looking forward to this, Brian.
Indeed. All right, I'm Brian Tillman. I'm one of the pastors at Ben Hill United Methodist Church in Atlanta, and I serve as the chair for the Commission on Religion and Race for the North Georgia Conference. And so I was invited to be a part of this discussion, and I'm honored to do so. Um, like Joe, I come to this as a practitioner, but not as an expert. And so I am constantly learning and trying to absorb new information and new strategies to be better in myself and to better help other people and the North Georgia Conference as well, as we together work to deal with the issue of race in our conference and in our world.
Are we going to be asked questions, or do you want us just to talk? I can do both.
Likewise.
Well, you know what? I will start then, just
Okay.
kind of in preparing for this. Brian and I both said that we are coming as individuals, and but tried to prepare a little bit for this. So I did go online and look at the Religion and Race website, and they had a wonderful thing that I think was also brought up before: the difference between debate, discussion, and dialogue. And this really is a dialogue, and I advise you to go on to their website and kind of see the differences. Brian, I'm sure you're familiar with this chart.
Yeah. All right, so we were given some questions in general that we were asked to address. And I think one of the discussions we got into this week, Joe, was about allyship. And there's a real need for that. And then I sort of upped the ante to a different level, if you will, that are called co-conspirators as well. And so, Joe, I'll toss this out to you. How about that?
Okay, so
you want to tell us how you see allyship?
Okay. So when Brian and I had our prior discussion, he did start using the word co-conspirator, and I kind of wrestled with that. And last night I went online and I got the definition of conspirator, and I'll tell you why I think I bristled a little bit. Oh, technology. All right, the synonym for conspirator was criminal, outlaw, plotter, felon, crook. Yeah, so there was a reason that I kind of bristled at co-conspirator, because I was raised to be a rule follower, and in this work, I am very comfortable pushing, but not being a criminal. I think it's sometimes the difference between being a protester and being a rioter. And so that's kind of where that word bothered me. But as an ally, I think it's important to come with open ears and open hearts, but also realize race relation is not just about being, black. It's about all of us together. So that's ally to me is a more of a bridge building word.
Yeah, and I agree. I think co-conspirator is a different intensity of engagement. And so I see allies are those who agree with the basic premise of anti-racism and fighting for racial justice. But there are some individuals that are so engaged in this work, in this process, that I see them more as co-conspirators, that they're people that I even draw on for information and for techniques and for ideas as we engage in the work together. So it's not a matter of which word you prefer to use, but I do look for people that I identify as co-conspirators because they can do the work along with me, not just being on my side and being there as someone who's rooting for us. And that's not necessarily the case, but a co-conspirator is someone I see that's actively involved in fighting the racist systems that we see in our society. I don't want to call anybody out, but I see one on the screen right now, Carol Adams, who's on your screen from Glen Memorial United Methodist Church, serves with me on the Commission on Religion and Race. and she is definitely a co-conspirator in this work. And so I appreciate you being on here with us as well. But that's one thing that Joe and I were just talking about, just different ideas, different language, and different ways about going about doing this very important and vital work. And so one of the other questions that was there is, how do we support our allies or co-conspirators in this work? Joe, you want to hit that one first?
I think it's important to be prepared, learn, be open to, I don't want to say criticism, but open to corrections, and have a listening heart. That's really hard for me. I'm a people pleaser. So there have been times in my life that maybe I've said used incorrect language, and I was called out on it, and I felt like the teacher was scolding me, and and I need to, for me personally, I need to be more open and welcoming when I need to look at something a different way, or maybe not use that language, or this is a preferred way of communicating. So that to me is helpful. Both work with myself in being more open and accepting to guidance, and then also to the others, that they be willing to call me on things. And so I think that's real important. I think reading, the United Methodist Women are, we're not able to gather with Mission U, but this is one of our books for Mission U. And there's a wonderful online, what is it called? Bridges program, in which we're working on that. And so I think that's important, to come prepared, knowing history. You brought up Juneteenth. I grew up in southern Texas, so I knew about it. But now the nation, I think, knows about it, and I think that's important, to know history and know what's gone on. So as an ally, that's where I'm coming from. Brian?
Yeah, I agree. One of the questions I see on the side of the chat over here is there any preparation that needs to be done to become either a co-conspirator or an ally? And that's, I think, what Joe just started talking about, that anyone who's seeking to be an ally or co-conspirator, whichever word you choose, needs to do their own work. And I think that work needs to begin with you. Digging into who you are, how you are, your own history, where your family comes from, and the history of your family as it relates to race. I remember that we were doing a intercultural competency workshop, and the facilitator for the workshop, this is for the conference, on the conference level, the facilitator for the workshop went around and asked, everyone in the room, was about 30 people in the room, and asked them, where did you learn to be racist? And they had 3 options to choose for their answer. They could either say at home, at school, or at church. And so he went around the room and everyone gave their answer one at a time. And most individuals would choose either at school or at church. And so then he moved on and went to some other questions, and we thought we moved on from that topic. And then later he went to a white female in the room and asked her, and was going to ask every white female in the room the same question. And the question was, if you were in high school, if you were to come home and tell your parents that you were dating a black male from your school, what would they have felt? And almost each of them, all of them said they would have been disappointed. And then a facilitator shot back at them, but I thought you said you didn't learn racism at home. If you didn't learn racism at home, your parents would not be disappointed that you were dating someone of a different race. And so that, forced them to deal with the reality that these things that they so despise have been taught to them by the people that they love and cherish and admire and respect in their homes, sometimes unknowingly, but still those lessons were taught and are deeply ingrained in all that we do. And so doing your own work, dealing with your own past and your own history is essential in this work. You've got to dig up those skeletons in the closet and find out who you are and how you got that way. Joe, I want to leave some space and room for you here.
Do you want to hear my white story about that?
Sure.
Okay, I'm going to go down the side path. So our rule was you couldn't talk on the phone after 10 o'clock. And I was on the phone after 10, and my father overheard me say, "How do you know I won't go out with you? Ask me, ask me." And he laid into me and he said, "You never say that to a boy." And I turned to him and I said, "You're just being racist." He had no idea who was on the phone. And it turned out it was a Black friend of mine. And we never did go out on a date, but my parents invited him to our home. And now 45 years later, he's still a friend of the family and comes by and visits with mom more than I do sometimes. But I have to laugh because here I just assumed my parents were being racist, and no, I was breaking the 10 o'clock rule. But thank you for sharing that. And I think as a white person, we also always deny that we are racist. And the thing is, there is a part of that. Another website or video that I would suggest looking at is Robin DiAngelo's Deconstructing White Privilege. And it really talks about understanding who you are. I mean, I don't think about my skin color 99% of the time. And that's part of the issue, is that I am not really in touch with who I am. And I think before we start talking about race, we have to acknowledge our past, as Brian said, and some of our and one of the things she talked about that I found interesting, I'd love to hear your response on this, Brian, is racism. We look at it as a bad, if I say, "Are you racist?" that's a bad thing. And you think of, Confederate flags and KKK and whatever, and, being but I'm a good person. So the word racist also has a lot of baggage that's part of it, because there aren't many people percentage-wise that would say, "Yes, I'm a racist." However, that word, we all have some ideas about who we are based on our skin color.
Yes, agrees. That word does create sort of a stigma for a lot of people, but I still use it. I think it's appropriate to use, and it's also appropriate to very clearly state that there's different types of racism and different levels of it as well. And so there's individual racism that is person to person. There's also racism in systems and institutions. And so a lot of what we're hearing about today is racism that is inside of systems. And so we call it systemic racism or institutional racism. And so when we're talking about things like police brutality, that is something that we're looking at because it appears to be systemically racist, that there are racist outcomes that are produced. I want to be clear about what a racist outcome is. Racist outcomes do not mean necessarily that the system was built in a way that intends for the outcome to be racist. It does not mean that. It can be the reality, but it's not necessarily that. There are certain systems that were created, did not have race in mind, yet the outcomes still come out racist. And so an example of this is creating a rule or a policy about or law about a particular practice and making it criminal, where the races of people do that same thing at the same rate, but it ends up that one segment of the population, race-wise, ends up getting caught for that thing more than the rest. And so then there's a racist outcome with that system. We see this very often in the criminal justice system. So we talk about the war on drugs, for instance. The war on drugs, drug usage. Thanks, I see Joe holding up a card. That was one of her topics, I guess. Drug usage in the United States is very similar across racial lines. Black people do not use drugs at a higher rate than white Americans. However, when you look at drug arrests, drug convictions, and drug sentences, there's a racist outcome that is consistently produced where Black people are exponentially more likely to be arrested, charged, sentenced, and their sentences tend to be much longer than their white counterparts for the same exact offenses. And so that the system has produced a racist outcome when that occurs. And so a lot of what we're hearing now today is things that are being attacked because the system is producing a racist outcome. Joe, I know you wanted to speak, and so I want to pause to give you that chance.
Well, thank you, because yes, the book Just Mercy by Brian Stevenson was my aha to that issue. And they talk about, the use of cocaine, for example, whether it's powder, which, the suburban white young people, or not even young people, but are sent to rehab. And the urban young people are, if it's, I don't even know my drugs. What is it? Crystal? I don't even know. Anyway, they are sent to jail. And so it's as Brian was pointing out, it's two different ways of treating the same issue of drug abuse, but in two totally different ways. And, the war on drugs, there have been some people that talk about that really was a concerted effort for incarcerating persons of color. I don't know. I'm kind of a Pollyanna. I can't believe that was the original intent, but it might have been. But then the stigma. I think the movie Color Just Mercy is free also on Netflix. Is it? I don't remember.
Fandango, I think, has it for free right now.
Right. And but the book really is good because it does go into this, and some of you might have even heard Brian Stevenson when he came to speak. But that's a UMW reading list book, and it counts as 2 books. So, but I think that's important that we look at the systemic racism. I also have recently learned about some of the loan practices and the segregation of neighborhoods, and how even the government, when they were dealing with vets and giving VA loans, and how that all has added to some of the racism that is part of our system. And maybe that's where you get the co-conspirator, is to, undo some of these systems that have become so racist. And that's what I think that this movement is really bringing to light for a lot of people.
So this is Sabrina. Yeah. If this is a good place, Reverend Tillman, there are a couple of, before we get too far afield in systemic racism regarding the ally co-conspirator. If I can scroll back up, there is a message here, the question. We frequently hear from people of color that they are done with educating people on things they need to know about people of color. How do you respond?
Yeah, I get it. And I think, James Baldwin said to be Black and American, to be conscious, is to be in a constant state of rage. And so people who tell you they're tired of helping white people figure out racism, I say leave them alone. Not to force anyone to engage that's not ready to do so or not in a state of mind to do so. It takes a certain amount of emotional energy to have these conversations. And if you're not able to do that, then it's probably best for that person of color to not engage at that time. Sometimes it's a day by day thing. For me, it is. It's a day by day thing. I can't have these conversations with white people 7 days a week. It's too exhausting. It takes too much work, too much emotional investment to do that every single day. And then depending on what happened that day, if there's a major issue that is risen up on that day, that's probably not the best day for me to be in those conversations. I need some time to reflect on my own and to get myself back into a good mental state to be able to have a fruitful conversation that can be helpful to the person. Otherwise, I'll just end up venting on that person unnecessarily. It does not help them. It hurts them, makes them feel like they did something or offended me when they really didn't. I'm offended and upset with the system that's always constantly there working. And if I'm venting or bleeding on that person, I'm not helping the situation. So I would say people who acknowledge that they're not able to have those conversations right now, to leave them alone until they're ready to do so.
Thank you.
Is there another? You want to?
Okay. Yes, there is another. It appears that sometimes white persons may be afraid at times of what words to use. So, and I think you just touched on this about courage. So it takes courage to ask and gentleness in the response. So any thoughts on, but I think again, you just covered this with.
Well, I'm a storyteller,
Okay.
so you're going to get a story. So when I was the director at Action Ministries, I had a very multi-ethnic group of staff, and young, older, and whatever. And I just said, okay, I am just so confused. Are you Black? Are you African American? And they cracked up because the people that were my age were African American, the younger ones were Black. And then my sister and I had a conversation this week, and she's writing some kind of a newsletter, and she goes, do I capitalize the W now? Or because I know I'm supposed to capitalize the B for Black, and so these are kind of, I feel like sometimes I'm walking on landmines because I just sometimes don't know my audience and know, so that's a real kind of a stressor. We don't want to offend, but then not wanting to offend becomes offending.
Yeah. I think it's very easy to do that, and I think it also matters about relationship, right? And if you're in a close relationship with a person of color or with a Black person, and you just heard me say Black, by the way, then you're in a place where you can ask those questions. I don't think you want to ask someone you don't know those types of questions. If you don't know their name, you probably shouldn't ask them if you should call them Black or African American. Let's start with their name, say hello, tell them who you are, and go that way, rather than being so concerned about which column to peg them in. When it comes to Black versus African American, it's a case by case, person by person preference. For me, I prefer Black. One of the primary reasons I prefer Black is because it's shorter. It doesn't require as many syllables to come out. And with seeing those two terms for me primarily equally, it doesn't really matter. I'm not offended if you say African American or Black, but I most often will say Black. And when I'm writing as well, when I'm writing things or articles or what have you, I almost always use Black. And one of the reasons is it's shorter, and I can get through with my thought in a quicker way. So it's just a matter of preference for me, but it does vary by generation. My grandfather is 84 years old. He'll be 85 this year. and he still prefers colored. But you only worry about what to call someone race-wise, generally if you don't know them, and if you're talking about them to someone else and you want to identify their race. And so I don't think it's something that we need to concern ourselves with overly so. I think you should get to know people, get to know their names, know their name, and have a relationship rather than being so concerned about if they prefer African American or Black. My preference, and you have a lot of Black people on this Zoom call, and they may have a different opinion and view of that as well.
Thank you. I want to acknowledge, excuse me, I wanted to acknowledge that Luther has his hand up. So Luther, if you wanted to jump in with your question.
Yes, I'm enjoying the conversation between Joe and Reverend Tillman, but I'd like to, what helps me is to listen, but I'd like to hear what some of our guests, what their concerns are as it relates to racism, and then maybe we can open up some dialogue to help them, help us, help them, help us.
Thank you for that, and we will do that throughout the course.
Before we leave the conversation about words, my sister in Texas is very active with a cemetery from the middle of the last century. And it had a big sign that said cemetery for slaves. And the word as a noun for slaves, it now says, enslaved people.
Good.
And it's just a small little twist, but it means a lot, because to be identified about your situation is very different from being an adjective, that these were people,
right,
that were enslaved.
Right. It's a big difference. When I hear someone talk about people who were, quote, slaves, you're talking about identity. And I don't care what was forced upon me. My identity was never slave. I was enslaved. It was something that was done to me and to my people. It's not who I am. And so I think it's a big difference. And as often as I'm able, I try to help people to see that difference and to choose better language. I think I'm okay to do this because it was done publicly. You may have seen the statement from Bishop Sue in the cabinet last week. And when that statement was originally sent out, she actually did that very thing. She used slave and master language. And we had a conversation after that. And the next day she went in and changed it, and also included an article that she found to help educate other people about what that means and the difference there, and changed the language in the statement to use enslaved and enslaver instead. And it went a long way with a lot of people who were offended by the prior language, for them to see that even the Episcopal leader, one, will make mistakes and errors. She was able to be approached about the error that she made. Then she made the correction herself and then shared that information with other people so they could learn the same lesson that she learned. And I think that was a huge step for us and for her, and very proud of what she did, and hopeful that you all will follow suit and do the same thing. You will make mistakes. And when you are corrected, hear it, listen, go and do the work to learn what was being shared with you, and then make the change.
Some good questions on here.
Does anyone want to share before Reverend Tillman and Joe proceed? If you do, please unmute yourself.
Hey, Sabrina, this is Jessica.
Yes.
There have been many, many times in my life where I have not been acknowledged as a woman who is smart, capable, and can do the same work or have the same value as my white sisters. And I just want to say to my white sisters on the call that I just want you to see me, acknowledge me, get to know me before you make decisions about me. And then help your friends and your families to realize the same thing. Know who I am. Look at me as a woman, as a person who is capable. Don't make decisions based on the color of my skin or things that you've seen in the media. Get to know me and see me the same as you would see another sister. My skin is just a different color, and that's it.
I'm blessed to know you, Jessica.
Thank you, Joe.
Hi, my name is Precious. I'm the Vice President for Ben Hill United Methodist Women. And this is a really great conversation, and you touched on pieces of things that may not be great to hear or say. I was very blessed to grow up in a wonderful area in Northern Virginia. I attended Calvary United Methodist Church. That when I was a child, I think my mom and I were probably the third or fourth only African Americans or Black people to join the church. It's a predominantly white church, but it is the church that molded me and gave me such love that I can walk in that church to this day and feel like it is everything. But I was having a conversation with my mom the other day about phrases when I would spend time with women in United Methodist that were in United Methodist Women, and they were older generation, and they came through that World War I, World War II time frame, and they would say things, and this is where I think Reverend Tillman and Joe both touched on. Don't be afraid to say something to us. Even as a child, I could tell the difference in the tone and the connotation of what was being said. It's saying to me, I never spent this type of time with a Black girl. I didn't know you could be, they just didn't know, because they only knew what they grew up through and what they knew. But I knew how they spoke to me and the way that they loved on me. It was not to offend me in any way. Anything they said came across with true love and true intention. And I to this day, like I said, I love them with all my heart. But it's a growing experience for both sides. I can't sit here and say I want change and I want you to see me differently, and then get offended if you ask me a question how to address me. I can't do both. But I will say it is just good to have that open dialogue, to be able to have it. And I think if you just keep approaching it with that open heart and the open mind, everything will work out the way it's supposed to. It's just that closed-mindedness. That's how I look. I see Iona. I see your hand up.
Yeah, I do. Before Iona goes, I did want to say the same thing. It's safer in relationship to have those conversations. And so I advise white people often that if you have a close relationship with a person of color, ask them if you guys can form a relationship in a different way where they can become your racial informant, where that gives you permission to call them to ask these sort of questions that they would not feel comfortable asking elsewhere in another place, in a safe way where the person is not going to be so easily offended and are able to manage what's being said, and you can hear someone's honest opinion about what you're asking. And so forming a relationship or a bond to have a racial informant would be really helpful. I saw Iona's hand as well. Iona, you want to ask your question?
I don't have a question. I just have a statement. Joe mentioned about the drug issue, and I just want to say that there's a wonderful movie out on Netflix called 13th, and it's regarding the 13th Amendment, and it explains the language that was added to keep Black in captivity regarding the drug issue. So I recommend this movie to everyone out there. It's called 13th. Yep. And it's regarding the 13th Amendment, and it will explain the drug issue and how so many Blacks are in prison and cannot vote. And all of this started with the presidents, President Nixon, Reagan, even Clinton. And Clinton apologized for his continuing to carry that out. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, Iona's right. That's a great film to watch and to learn to see how that has developed. One of the things you'll learn is that at one point, the law, the punishment for use of crack cocaine versus cocaine in the powder form was 100 times greater for crack, literally 100 times greater for crack. And if you don't believe that, even Congress admitted it because they changed the the law for it so that it was only 13 times more instead of 100. It's the same substance that can transfer back and forth from powder to a more hard form. Same drug, but it was felt that black people were more likely to use crack, and so it was penalized 100 times more than for powder cocaine. And so that's just one example of how the racist outcomes are produced in the criminal justice system. All right. I'm looking at the right side, like Sabrina asked us to look, and I'm looking to see what's there.
I'm going to make a comment while you're looking.
Sure.
So we're also in UMW looking at the prisoner pipeline, and the book Push Out is specifically talking about the women that are incarcerated, the women of color that are incarcerated. And I started watching a video about that, and I'll be honest, it was so emotional for me. I had to pause it, and I'll come back to it. But it really opened my eyes because I did not realize the growth of women of color being incarcerated and how that pipeline. So anyway, highly recommend that too.
So this is
Thank you.
Sabrina. I have a question, Joe and anybody, Reverend Tillman. So in the recent protests at the beginning of this summer, and you know the rioting and the possible looting. Well, let me back up. One of the phrases in Ben Hill's vision statement is connecting people to God, and another phrase is across generations and wherever they are. And so there has been a push in United Methodist Women for younger members. I've said this in another forum or another circle about millennials, that, you know, we will say or make blanket statements about entitlement or they don't want to do the work or whatever. But millennials are pretty much running this movement right now. And as riots or protesting, I've been sort of unsettled about people's concern over property more than people. So yes, Target is insured. It'll be okay. McCormick and Schmidt will be okay. Their windows will be replaced. But I think it's changing the focus or getting my counterparts or my white counterparts in my workplace or in my circle to don't make property the emphasis when we have the conversation about what's going on right now.
Yeah, let me start my response by saying I do not like or affirm violent protests. Let me start there. I'm against it completely. I'm against it. I think that whole line of conversation or complaint from a lot of people is really covering something else. However, when I encounter people who only want to complain about a building set on fire or some items taken from a store, they often say, well, why can't they peacefully protest? And my response to that is, well, isn't that what Colin Kaepernick did? Wasn't his a peaceful protest and people were up at arms to the point that he can't get an NFL contract? Isn't that what the basketball players did with their I Can't Breathe shirts, and people were up in arms about that? And so we have many, many, many instances of people who used peaceful protests. And the response was as vigorous or more so than the response right now with the violent one. So I think the word in front of protest really is irrelevant. It's the protest that is problematic for a lot of people. The fact that people are not just taking this oppression that many people admittedly say they cannot see. The fact that they're not just taking it is the problem. Is disturbing their quiet, as I would say. They would say disturbing the peace. No, it's not peace. What is desired is quiet. Peace cannot exist where there's an absence of justice. You cannot have peace without justice. I think people are screaming for quiet. And so I don't allow people to have that conversation with me because, it's just an opportunity to deflect to something else instead of dealing with the actual issues that are on the ground. I don't want to hear about a building when somebody is dead. There's one of these is not like the other.
One more question for the chat, and I'll let you and Joe resume.
Well,
This question.
may I just respond to that?
Sure.
This to me falls into the dialogue, because Brian, I might have had that conversation with you and made it sound like part of property, but thank you for making me look at it a different way. And can I put it on the t-shirt, peace cannot exist where there is not justice? Is that original? I love that. But
that is not original. King said the same thing, and others before him did as well. So I can't claim it. Now, I mean, you can go ahead and do it though. But okay.
But that's an example of Sabrina. I might have been the one to have the conversation, and it come out that I was more concerned about property because I don't like destruction of things, and so. But I had not looked at it that way. So thank you, Brian.
And one more question here. Black people are often told not to be so sensitive and that we are racist. So what would you say?
What I saw a white woman with a sign over the last few weeks, and it was something like, if my son did not come home from being in a Wendy's drive-through, or from jogging, or from all these other things that we've seen Black people do and they end up dead, that one, they would be upset. She could be upset too, and she would burn the whole city down if that were the case. I think that it's insensitive for white people to see what is happening to us and what has happened to us, and then throw at us that we're being overly sensitive. I think that's very interesting to come out of the mouths of people who, by and large, support Confederate symbols remaining intact and in place. I think perhaps they're the ones with the sensitivity issue. If they can't tolerate having symbols of white supremacy taken down when they say themselves they are not white supremacists. So I'm offended when someone says that, not to the point that I want to haul off and do something irrational, but I think these are just ways of deflecting the conversation away from where it needs to be. Racism in America is a problem for Black people. It's not a Black problem. It's a white problem. It is a white problem, and white people have to fix it and need to fix it. It is your work that needs to be done. We're the ones who experience it. It's not our problem, however. And so I don't think Black people are overly sensitive. I think that's impossible. I think really white America needs to thank the Black church that Black America has not hauled off and armed themselves and just went off and just massacred any white people that they see. Because the white church, in spite of what has happened, the Black church, in spite of what has happened to us, has taught us to love our enemies, love those who hate you, love those who curse you. And our grandmamas taught us, don't do to them what they do to you. Don't treat them like they treat you. You're better than that. And so we've been taught that from the time we were kids. White America needs to thank God for the Black church, because it's kept us sane enough to live this life and to deal with all that is thrown our way without going ballistic. And so, to endure all that we've endured, I think for someone to say that is incredibly insensitive, ignorant, and I have a whole bunch of other adjectives, but this is a Christian call, so I'm going to refrain from using.
I do want to piggyback what you talked about, the Black church. The expression that at 11 o'clock on Sunday morning is our most segregated time. And I have been a member of a Black church when I was in Louisiana, and very welcoming. But I'm very torn about becoming here I'm searching for words. So blended that identity is lost. Anyway, it's an opportunity for us to. I'm very torn about how do I want to see the Black church culture, music, and the preaching taken away. You know what I'm even trying to get to? I don't.
Yeah. When I was in seminary, I started a student group about multiracial congregations. And so less than 5% of churches in the United States are multiracial. And that standard requires that no racial group makes up more than 80% of the congregation. And so that's a very small burden, but still less than 5% of churches in the United States are multiracial. A lot of the churches that call themselves multiracial today do not, and I repeat, do not deal with issues of race. It's simply off the topic, off the table. They don't talk about it. Because when you talk about it, you have to reveal the injustices that have created the dynamics that separates one race from the other. A lot of people complain about Black institutions like HBCUs and Black professional clubs and Black sororities and fraternities and the Black church. But make no mistake, those institutions are creations to deal with the fact that there's racism in America. Black colleges are not created if the other colleges and university allowed and admitted Black students. And because they do now does not mean we should go and close our Black colleges because we can go to the larger white ones. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense. So, the racism that we see has created the Black church. And the Black church is a place where Black people can go fully be themselves. And whatever happens to them in that Black church is not negative because they are Black. The same reason I went to a HBCU. I went to an all-white high school where all the Black kids could sit at one lunch table during the lunch hour. And when it was time for me to go to college, I wanted to go somewhere where whatever bad was going to happen to me, it wasn't going to be happening because I was Black. And so I chose to go to the HBCU. If an institution needs to close because of racism, it needs to be the white ones. If we're going to close churches, it needs to be the ones that are overwhelmingly white, especially in communities where the racial dynamics are much more diverse and inclusive. So, I support multiracial congregations in theory, but only if they're going to deal with issues of race. If they're going to ignore that topic, then I think what's the point of getting people who are different race sitting in the pews so you can have a nice photo? I'm not with that.
Another question from the chat. Too often white churches talk about wanting to have more diversity in their church. They mean, well, it's a comment, they mean that they want more Black people to come to their church.
I think Brian touched on that. Having a Black pastor or a Black SPR chair, someone in leadership is very different than having multicultural sitting in the pews and the leadership. And I just, before we, I want to say I give thanks daily for United Methodist Women and my deaconess brothers and sisters, because that is the portion of my life that has increased my spirituality, increased my social justice awareness. And I think we are great role models, even though Jessica, has voiced some concern of that we are not doing it well either. But United Methodist Women are talking. We are trying to learn, and we are in discussions. And I just am very thankful. And I'm looking forward to being the Fulton County District, because that's going to be very interesting with the dynamics of the race issue.
Yeah, I used to serve cross-racially at 3 prior churches, and so that was being appointed to a largely white churches, and the experience there is incredibly rich. I would say lots of different experiences, and the appointment kind of depended on. So I was there as an associate pastor each time. It really depended on who the senior pastor was, and how vocal that senior pastor was when it came to issues of race and injustice. And so when I had a senior pastor who would preach from the pulpit about racism and about injustice, that freed me to be able to do so. If I had a senior pastor who did not do that, then I had problems when I did so. And I do mean when I did so. They were on alert and on notice. Whatever is happening outside on the streets, I'm going to talk about inside the church, period. And I don't care who you are. You can be my senior pastor, you can be my superintendent, you can be my bishop. You are not going to stop me from having these conversations. And I've had to say that directly to my superintendent before and told them to tell the bishop. And if that means that you're going to now punish me for doing so, knock yourself out, because the only person I'm afraid of is my mama and God. And that's it. And my mom is behind this, and I know that God is essential to the justice, to the gospel. And so, the importance of knowing who you are in those spaces is really essential to your own survival and my mental stability in being there. I am happy to report that for 3 years, I had a wonderful cross-racial appointment experience where I was respected. My leadership was respected and affirmed, and things went extremely well. But those were the only 3 years of the 8 that I was in that context that I can say that. Did I say something wrong?
Not at all.
Crickets.
Not at all. There are no more pending hands raised or questions in the chat at the moment.
I do see some questions on our sheet that I think are important. Can I address those?
Right.
So one of them is what does implicit racism look like, and what are some examples? I think this is a really good thing to talk about, because it does deal with you as an individual, and so doing that individual work. So implicit bias is a racial bias that you have that you are largely not aware of. You're acting in a way, making decisions, and doing things that you are not aware contributes to racist outcomes and discriminate treatment. And so one of the tools that everyone could actually access, there's a Harvard implicit bias study. And so if you went on Google and Google Harvard implicit bias, you'll be directed to this sort of game, if you will. It's kind of, I call it a game, but it's experience where they give you an implicit bias test, and you are shown where you have a negative bias. And so I did this as well as part of GCOR, the General Commission on Religion and Race in DC. They were producing a document, and so they asked several of us to take part in that experience. And so I did the test, and I want you to hear this. me as a black man showed in that test that even I have implicit bias towards other black males. How is that possible? It's possible because of how we are taught in schools. It's possible how media is produced and how we see things and we're taught things that we don't realize we're being taught. And so even I have an implicit bias towards black males. And so I encourage you to take that test, go search for Harvard implicit bias study, and do it and see where you are. And then start to take steps to address that implicit bias. And please hear, it is not intentional. I have no intentional bias against other black males. It's something that was deeply ingrained and taught in me and indoctrinated throughout all of American society. It's almost impossible to be raised in the United States of America and not have a negative bias towards African American males. And so I encourage you to take part in that and to learn what your implicit bias is and then take steps to address it. I have another one if you'd like me to continue, Sabrina.
Well, I'm going to take this the next one.
Okay.
Let's take this one more. Yes.
All
thank
right.
you.
It talked about do you support the Black Lives Matter movement and how? So this is a conversation I have with a lot of my white friends, that they talk about all lives matter. And I use one of two different analogies, and it's like, so all homes matter, but the one that's on fire is where you send the fire truck. And the other one analogy that I just got recently was when you go to the doctor with a broken arm, all bones matter, but the one that he's looking at is the broken arm. So I thought those are real good, quick comebacks to why all Black lives matter.
Agree.
I agree. So I'm looking at the time. So it's 11:17, and that time has flown by because this conversation has been engaging, enlightening, stimulating. So there are a couple of messages right now in the chat that talk about how do we move forward. So there are many things that need to be addressed, from voter suppression to police brutality. So let's share a little bit and systemic changes. Let's share just a little bit about how do we move forward.
You want to go first, Joe? I'm happy to jump in, but you're muted. Oh, okay. All right. So yeah, I think moving forward, what I said before is everyone do their own personal work. But there's also some urgency as it comes to elections. Who gets elected, that takes part in how government is formulated, how laws are made and passed, and how things get corrected. A lot of the issues in our systems can only be corrected by government. That the people have to elect people that are going to address these issues. And so there's no way of getting around that. And so I think that that's a major emphasis. I encourage Black people all the time to vote in every single election. All the primaries, local elections, school board elections, commissioner, all you need to vote for all that. I don't care if it's a PTA election. You need to be voting. And one of the things I do every year is to participate with the SELC women. This is a group, is not the same as the SELC. It was started by some of the wives of the civil rights leaders from SELC back in the day, but this is a phenomenal group of largely women that continue to educate and inform. And one of the things they do every single year is to take what's called the Civil Rights Heritage Tour and through Alabama. And it kind of highlights and educates on how the Voting Rights Act was passed and what it took for that to take place. And so I try to get people to go every year. And I personally invest in one person a year to go along with me. And so I encourage you to take advantage of your constitutional right to vote in every election and to intentionally vote for people that are going to be working on behalf of Black people and people of color. I make no apologies for that. You probably know where I am, and if you're not, I'm going to tell you, the current president is behind one of the worst presidential collection of individuals we've ever seen in this country. This guy needs to come out of office. That's probably not appropriate for a UMW conversation, but I'm just telling you the truth. If you are wondering how you would have responded in the 1950s and 60s to the civil rights movement, you're seeing it right now. This is the moment. If you want to take part in that and to do something to fight on the call for the cause of Black people, right now is your opportunity. And the person we have right now in the White House has been the greatest impediment to justice we've had in a very long time. And so if you want to look at George Wallace and Bull Connor and Jim Clark, you can throw this president right in line with them. He's following some of the same moves, except he has way more power than they did. And so he needs to go. And so the first thing you can do is to vow to not vote for this president. I'm not telling you who to vote for. I'm saying don't vote for this one. Vote for somebody else. And I'll leave that with that. So that's one thing that we can all do if you are serious about making change as it relates to race in this country. You cannot vote for the current president.
So I'm not going to dispute anything he said about that. I'll just leave it at that. But
I just said what you can't say.
well, hey, I'll say it. I'll say it. But he brought up the SCLC, and I'm a grandmother of 5, and I took one of my granddaughters on that trip. She was 12 at the time, and I think that was life-changing for her to have an understanding of the history. So those of us that are parents and grandparents, to really have these difficult conversations with the young people. And sometimes as a grandparent, I can have some of the conversations that maybe their parents can't have, and they will share things that they wouldn't feel comfortable talking to their parents about. So I think that's very important, is to really expose and learn and constantly do that. The second thing was, our church has gotten a bad rap over the last few years of being inclusive of lifestyles and who people choose to love. And the millennials are really, that's one of the big things that they are turning their backs on us because we're not being relevant. Well, with this topic, I think we have a chance to maybe gain some more of the respect and being part of a leader in the movement, because I know during the civil rights, the church really was a leader in the movement, and I think we'd be missing a wonderful opportunity to share God's love, because it is the message, God's message of love for all, that this conversation is really wrapped around.
Okay, Joe, this is Barbara Giametta, and you know, I've sat here quietly and I've listened and I've learned a lot, but I also want to share. I think as United, because I'm coming at this from a United Methodist woman, because that's what we are about this morning. And I think each one of us on this call, we are leaders. We are leaders in our church. We're probably leaders in our community. And I don't disagree with the thing that's been said, especially Brian's recent comments, because I think I was the first one that noted there are things going on right now that we women, especially us white women, we have a voice, and we need to use that voice. It is very concerning to me, the voter suppression. It is real. It is there. And we each have a responsibility to speak up. I love the comment about a poll worker. They are begging for poll workers. We do not want what happened a few weeks ago to happen again in November, because this is a very, very important election. But we also have a personal responsibility, and I want to share with you, I had a skilled technician in my home a couple of weeks ago. It happened to be on election day. And he was a Black man, 40 years old, very articulate. He was making his repairs, and as I was writing him out the check, I said, "Have you been to vote yet?" He said, "No, I'm not going to vote." And I said, "Why?" He said, "Because I don't know who to vote for." And I'm thinking, here is a middle-class, educated Black male who has more to lose than anybody. And I said, you know, I encourage you, you have to go vote. And between, if you don't know who to vote for, because, you know, there are a lot of really important decisions to be made on that thing that would impact all of us. So I think we each have to take that opportunity to try to educate and encourage everyone, you know, to take the time, stand in the line, to cast that ballot, and to cast it for people who will be a leader of all races, of all people, who do not work their hidden agenda. The other thing that I think we need to do better at is to start this conversation, because we don't have this conversation in our churches. And we don't understand. We are like in silos. You've got the white silo and the Black silo. And even though, and I'm a child of the 50s and 60s, my high school was not brought together and integrated until I was a senior. I remember as a child going to the county library. I guess I was 8 years old. My mom took me to the county library. This is my first exposure to racism. We walked in and we saw 2 water fountains. And I read that colored over one and white. And I asked my mother, "What does this mean?" And that was my very first exposure. I was there at the public swimming pool when the Black kids showed up to swim and all the white kids got out of the pool. So it was horrible. And I guess I was raised in a very loving Christian community where everyone was inclusive. But we still have those silos where that is not, and we have to start that. I'm very proud of my little Dunwoody, the UMW book club, because at last month's meeting, they said, we want to do a book on race. We need to start this conversation. And so we're going to do the book, So You Want to Talk About Race. But I also think that we need to talk more about the school to prison pipeline, because my white counterparts are like, what is that? What is that exactly? So that just shows you the void and the opportunity that we have. So I guess what, you know, I just hope that I can contribute is that we've got to start the conversation. Today is a great start, but we even need to bring groups together. I think just like when we discussed this book club, it's like, well, do we want to, maybe we should invite a Black person to come to our book club and talk to us. And I said, yeah, we do. You know, we need to, this doesn't just need to be, oh, we read the book and here's what we think. Well, we need to have a conversation together. So I just wanted to share that with you all. You know, I'm with you, but we've got a lot of work to do, as you all know.
Thank you, Barbara, for sharing that. And I will just add on from the Black perspective. We've always known there's a lot of work to do. We've been fighting and working our whole lifetime. So, you know, the parameters may be different, but, you know, even when you're in a battle or a skirmish for a long time, you still want to come off the field sometime.
Well, and Sabrina, I understand that. I think, you know, I think maybe we white people don't realize we have a lot of work to do. We have a lot of work to do. And I think I meant more of that to educate and to be inclusive and to bring, you know, the conversation and be inclusive, you know, just to sit and say we're inclusive. That sounds good, but it kind of goes back to we got to walk the talk, you know. But thank you for clarifying and letting me clarify that.
Absolutely. Okay, so this again has been a very stimulating conversation. So as we begin to get to our close with Joe and then our benediction with Reverend Tillman, again, I'll just remind you, if those of you who are able and want to stay on the call afterwards, we can continue the dialogue and the discussion, the venting or the sharing, whatever, you know, comes up. For Ben Hill members, Jackie is on the call, on the session, and in the chat, she is putting how to connect with her to send pledges. At this point, Joe, if you want to unmute yourself, thank you.
You're still muted, Joe.
Gotcha. Thank you, Reverend Tillman, for putting together and being a leader for the walk last, gosh, that seems like it was a month ago. I'm going to be honest with you. A lot has happened this week. And I was able to participate, and one of the things that I have personally taken on is I want to memorize the hymn, Lift Every Voice and Sing. And so I made this poster, and then the bishop talked about we're not supposed to sing in church. So I don't know if you can see it, but I said, so we'll do this Lift Every Voice virtually. She got a big kick out of that. So I am going to read the first verse of this hymn and anthem. Lift every voice and sing, earth and heaven ring, ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies. Let it resound loud as the rolling sea. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us. Facing the rising sun of our new day begun, let us march on till victory is won.
Thank you, Joe. And now please hear this benediction that I shared with my congregation this past Sunday. And now, may the Lord torment you. May the Lord keep before you the faces of the hungry, the lonely, the rejected, and the despised. May the Lord afflict you with pain for the hurt, the wounded, the oppressed, the abused, the victims of violence. May God grace you with agony, a burning thirst for justice and righteousness. May the Lord give you courage and strength and compassion to make ours a better world, to make your community a better community, to make your church a better church. And may you do your best to make it so. And after you have done your best, may the Lord grant you peace. Amen.
Thank you so much to our facilitators. You really did give us something to hope for, to glean to, lean into, and to work toward. Thank you again for your time. So the floor, yes.
I'm sorry, cut you off.
That's no problem.
Has been asked, if possible, because we want to help continue the conversation. Our churches, I know Dunwoody is represented. I know I heard Shannon United Methodist Church. I don't know if I've missed any others. If you could type your home church into the chat, that would be great, so we can keep on connecting and going forward with conversations.
And with that, the floor is open. If you need to leave, drop off the call. That's okay. Thank you for being here. For everyone else who wants to continue, stay here.
Joe, I wanted to give you another analogy for the Black Lives Matter. I had some Christian friends, and they challenged it, and they said, well, God, Jesus loves everybody. God loves everybody. And I said, yes. And I said, and that's why, when one stray sheep went astray, they went to find that stray sheep. You can't just, it didn't matter what color the sheep was. It didn't matter the sexual preference of the sheep. It didn't matter how the sheep was dressed. We have to get that one sheep so we can all be collective and together. So I'm just saying.
Don't you know today is Saturday? You're not supposed to be preaching.
I'm just saying, this is just other ways. I get concerned about the Christian battle that I hear about how we're supposed to love and using Bible verses and rhetoric, and I don't like that. And Barbara, I want to say I truly appreciate what you said. If I could hug you, I would hug you. I will give you a virtual hug. Saying what you said, that's the courage that we're talking about, to be that type of honest and not just saying it and putting it out there. That is the truth of the matter. We have to do better, just even within our own churches. Like I said, my church in Virginia, my mom's on the call. I swear, I remember the Guy Pong family. It was myself and one adopted Black boy at the church. That was it. So you walk in and you don't know how you're going to be felt. And that feeling of the church is the first thing. You don't have to say anything. It's going to be the looks that you receive. And that is going to tell you how well received you are in churches. I never felt the looks in that church. I love that church to this day. I go back and visit when I go back to Virginia. It is just love and home. Same way with Ben Hill. Ben Hill for me is the complete opposite. It's predominantly Black, but it was the love that I felt. It wasn't the skin I was looking at. It's the love. And that's what we have to feel first, to then feel comfortable, I think, to start to have those next conversations. So I thank you for your open and honest dialogue.
Sabrina, this is Jessica, and I have to say to Barbara as well, when I walked into Dunwoody for the first time and met Barbara, she was just so loving and kind and warm. So Barbara, thank you for that. Thank you for joining this conversation today and for the words that you had to say to us. So thank you.
Well, you all are very sweet and kind, and but I do feel like, because growing up in the era that I did, I just racism is still there, and I think it does take courage as a white woman to speak up, because sometimes you may be the only one in the room that speaks up and says, well, what about so-and-so? And what about that point of view? And that's why I just think we really have to, on the white part of this. And I may disagree a little bit about, like, well, racism is not a Black problem, it's a white problem. Well, it is a Black problem because it really is affecting you. It's everyone's problem. We really have to address this, and we really have to talk about it. And it does, it took courage for me to speak up. It takes courage to say, well, because kind of like the remarks that Joe and Brian said earlier, sometimes when you say those, you're subject, you feel like, well, are they going to jump on me? What criticism? And I guess we just have to stress that we have to listen with open hearts and open minds, But I'm too, kind of like someone else said, well, I'm really, Joe said that, she's excited to be with the Fulton. I'm really looking forward that Dunwoody is moving into DeKalb County as a new district. Because I think that's going to be very interesting, because we're going to have Black churches and white churches, and I think we're going to have more Black churches than white churches, and it's going to give us a really good opportunity to put into practice some of these things we've talked about this morning.
The floor is open for anyone to share anything that's on their minds or hearts. So.
I just want to share with Barbara that it will be an opportunity, but just be on the alert that what we've experienced in Atlanta College Park district is that although the white churches will host UMW events, they really do not participate when the events are held at Black churches. There's a very clear absence of white participation. So just perhaps you can encourage your members to participate even after that occurs.
Well, absolutely. And I think that will be something that we will have to focus on and encourage.
Okay. One of the things I heard, is that me with that background noise? Let's see here. So yesterday, my organization at work, so is anybody else hearing that feedback?
Yeah.
Let me do this. Let me mute all and then come back. So yesterday, work, my, I still hear it. Never mind. Let me get somebody else to say anything to make sure it's not just me.
Okay, I'll tell everybody about an opportunity to be engaged. Yeah, I'm getting it too. I'm getting it too. Yeah, but I just wanted to mention the End Mass Incarceration Georgia Network is a place to get information about advocating to end mass incarceration.
And this is Jessica. Go to the UMW website. I'll put it in chat.
It's like having a megaphone.
I'll put it in chat.
Okay, so if you're not speaking, let me ask you to mute yourself real quick. How about now? Still there. Okay. I don't hear it now. Not as bad. Well, one of the things that came up yesterday, I'm going to go press through this question, is about, Reverend Tillman, you mentioned about identity. And on my company, so now companies are falling all over themselves to be diverse. And so yesterday on Juneteenth, my company puts out at 10 a.m. a 1:30 call about Juneteenth. And I got on the call. And there is something about your identity. So if I say Black Lives Matter or I support the movement, I am not taking away from my white sisters and brothers' identity or any of their rights. It's just that I support it being equally disseminated for all of us, that by me just having my own identity, it shouldn't be an automatic threat to anybody. So I just wanted to share that.
Joe, I think they just want us to talk some more because they're not going anywhere.
I'm using this time to listen.
And you're welcome to if you like. So I read a funny thing, a post on Instagram the other day, just encouraging people, everything at work now. This is the best season for you to get your foot in the door where you were scared before. And it was sort of a tongue-in-cheek endorsement because I really want to feel like my organization means it with all of this, all of a sudden, diversity inclusion, but I don't.
I think for me, I just want to encourage everyone to hold them accountable. The things that are being said now that they want to do and they believe, when you see them stray away from it, bring them back to what they said in this period and what they stand for and hold them accountable.
Brian, did you see the bishop's comments yesterday? They're excellent.
Which ones?
No, they did a video. The council of bishops. all did the,
No, I didn't see it.
yeah, it's good. And then there's on Wednesday, there is a service, a worship service at 1 o'clock.
Didn't see that.
You know, we talked about voting earlier. I think Barbara mentioned, you did, Barbara, asking the guy at your home if he had voted yet. And I think, you know, so many people don't really know locally what the issues are, because I think it starts locally. You know, we have to elect the right people at the local level because it goes upward, you know, from there. My son told me when he got ready to vote, I said, have you really thought about who you're going to vote for? Do you know what they stand for? He said, I don't know. I just kind of, a few of them I know, but mostly I just look at the ballot and I just vote whatever's in my heart. It's like, but you haven't even researched. You don't know, you know, what they stand for. You don't know what their past voting history has been, if they are the incumbent. You don't know enough. You're not armed with the information necessary to make the right decisions for you, your family, your children. So maybe one thing we can do as United Methodist Women, and in our church too, is like help people understand the issues and help them understand who's on the ballots, what they stand for, you know, so that we can make informed decisions. I think that too many times we don't do that. We don't vote because we feel like we don't have enough information. We aren't armed with the right information. So maybe we can do that, because it does start at the local level, in my opinion.
I also want to say that in some districts, there's not a lot of option. I remember when I was appointed in the nether regions of the conference in Forsyth County, for instance, and I went to the voting booth. If it was not a statewide election or a national election, it was all one party unopposed. And sometimes it was one party, one candidate unopposed. And so there's not even a selection at all. It's predetermined before the ballot is even printed who the person is. So you're not actually voting for people at all. And so I'm enough of a rebel that I took the longest time, I think, of anybody in Forsyth County in the voting booth, because I wrote in a candidate for every one of those spots. And the candidate wasn't even a person. It was a phrase that I used that I won't share here because that would be inappropriate. But because I was not going to accept that I didn't have a choice for anybody else. And so, you know, if you see that in your area, find out what's going on with the local politics about who's running and who's not running, because we need to have choices in each election. We have to, and maybe it might mean that you need to run, or somebody else, encourage somebody else that has a good sense to run. So, you know, I just wanted to leave that with you too.
Also encourage everyone to do the census count. That's very important.
This was the first time that I voted absentee because I just didn't really want to get out in the crowd. And I found that to be very helpful because I got the absentee ballot and I had time. I had a few days to really research everybody that was on it before I voted. And one of the things I think we need to make sure that they don't take our vote by mail away, as our current person in the White House wants to do, because we don't know what COVID's going to be doing in November. And we need to make sure that we still can vote by mail through absentee ballots. And then we need to make sure those absentee ballots are counted, because sometimes there could be a question mark about that too.
And there is a website where you can check the status of your ballot. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I did. I went there and I saw that it was received.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to make sure it's counted.
I also want to put a bug in your ear about trying to push updating technology as it relates to voting. The mere fact that the majority of people have to leave their homes to drive to or get to a polling place is voter suppression. We can do almost everything with this cell phone. I could finish a mortgage with my cell phone. I did it last year. I bought a new home, did almost everything on this cell phone. If I can get a loan and sign my name on a dotted line for a large sum of money to purchase a home, they can probably figure out a secure way for us to vote using these phones as well. And so it really is just a matter of wanting to do it in a better way where the masses of people can actually participate in the voting process.
Yeah.
I'm going to sign off.
All right. I was just going to say there are no more messages in the chat, and the room has gone silent. So, if
Sabrina, is there a way for you to provide the contact information and emails and links that are in the chat to the group or to the body or to the at least to the presidents of the units that are here so that it could be shared with the units? I don't know the technology, so I'm just asking.
let's see here. I will look into that. I may just have to save the whole chat and go from there.
Okay.
Got something.
Bye, Sue.
Hey, is the recording available?
The recording is on my Zoom account through work, so I will save it and download it and forward it if you're
Okay.
interested. Mhm.
I am. Thank you.
You're very welcome. All right. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for the conversation and your time. Peace
Thank
be
you.
with you.
And with you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody. Bye.